I'm Jen from Your Life Uncomplicated. Welcome to my channel. This channel is all about, well, uncomplicating your life and specifically focusing on getting your financial life on track so you can live on your terms. Today's video is another video in a three-part series I'm doing about setting up a home budget. So the other two videos, and I'll link them in the description box below, the first one is about why budgets are important, and I really hope you'll take a look at that one because I think you'll find it pretty inspirational and will get on setting up your budget as soon as possible. And the second one is about analyzing your spending because that's what you're going to use as a baseline when you set up your budget. So please take a look at those after you watch this video. And today, what I want to do is talk about budgeting tips to make sure the budget you develop will actually work for you. As I've mentioned in my previous video, I got inspiration for this series from At Home with Nikki channel, which I'm sure you know and follow. It's a beautiful channel all about home and work organization. Well, Nikki recently published a beautifully organized home planner, which is basically step-by-step instruction to how to organize your home. So here's what it looks like. Isn't that gorgeous? Well, the very last part of this planner is all about setting up your home budget. So I thought it's a great place to start, and what I wanted to do is offer 10 tips to make your budget the most efficient to make sure it works for you. So let's dive in. What I've seen many people do when they set up their budget, they first put their income and then they start subtracting expenses, normally starting with either rent or mortgage. Well, remember, when we're setting up the budget, our biggest objective is to make sure we have enough money for retirement, for savings, for some of the goals we have. So first thing you want to do once you listed your income is pay yourself first. And you probably heard this concept before, but what it really means is allocating money for yourself before you start paying any bills, even mortgage or rent or groceries. And of course, when I say pay yourself first, I don't mean saving money for a fancy gadget or going out. I mean for investing in yourself, your retirement, your emergency fund, and your savings. That's what I'm talking about. And certainly I don't suggest you don't pay your expenses such as rent and credit cards. Of course, that's mandatory. But what it simply does, it allows you to take a portion of your income and quickly move it for your savings. Now afterwards, then you'll have a balance that's left and you would need to allocate it to the bills that are mandatory and then the rest of the expenses. And that's when you will start analyzing to see what expenses you can possibly cut and maybe they were not that important to start with. That's exactly what Nikki did in her budget as well. She put savings before expenses. Before you start listing your expenses in your budget, separate them into 3 categories: must have, nice to have, and like to have. Must have, that will be all of the expenses you must have in order for you to survive. So your mortgage or your rent, your utilities, those types of things that you're required to pay to survive. Nice to have would be more of optional expenses such as cable. Certainly nice to have it and watch sports, but not really vital for survival. And the third category would be like to have. So perhaps it would be going out or subscription to a magazine. Of course, this might be different for you depending on your lifestyle, but the idea here that you divide your expenses in order of importance. So must have, nice to have, and then like to have. So in case you need to trim some expenses or even get rid of some of them altogether, you would see which ones would probably go out first. Another thing I really like to do is allocate percentages that each expense represent of my spending. So for example, if I spend 5% or 10% of my income on subscriptions to magazines, okay, well maybe that's excessive. So these numbers will help you analyze your expenses. When you're planning your budget, don't forget about variable and upcoming or likely to happen expenses, because if you don't account for those, your budget can really be thrown off very easily. So when it comes to variable expenses, you might want to do a conservative approach and book the highest amount for every month. That way, in those months that it is higher, maybe your utility bill, for example, is higher in the summertime or maybe winter time. That way, in those high months, you're perfectly set. In those months that it is lower, you'll have some extra cash left over, which is always a nice feeling. Also, let's talk about upcoming expenses and those expenses that are likely to happen. So think about all of the things that you have to pay during the year. Perhaps it's an annual expense, perhaps it's a car registration or insurance or home insurance, or maybe you pay taxes during certain parts of the year. So remember everything that you should be paying, so that way you would allocate enough money every month towards those expenses, so when that bill comes, you're not surprised and get out of money. Also think about what's likely to happen during the year and in the future years as well. So for example, during the holiday times, we typically buy gifts. So do you have enough allocated? So you might want to start saving for that. Also, maybe you're planning some kind of an event or vacation. So remember those types of things that you want to account for. And even long term, if you're starting to think about purchasing a car in several years, you want to start planning for those early, so you can have a manageable amount of money that you would need to put aside for those expenses. Also think about expenses that might be unpredictable, and I'm not going to talk about emergency fund. That's definitely something you should have. I'm not going to talk about it in this video. We'll have a separate video dedicated just for that. But think about, for example, if you have a pet, they might get a vet expense. Vet charges can be very high, so just remember those and put money aside for those as well. When you decide which categories will go into your budget, don't make them too granular and too detailed, so your budget will become 15 pages long and will be difficult to manage and become confusing. But do put enough information so you know exactly what went into that category, so you can easily see how much money you spent on what. So for example, don't put just a food item in your budget, just one line food, and that would include everything associated with food, but separate, for example, to going out, dining out versus your groceries, so you know how much money you spend on groceries and how much money you spend on going out. When you're setting up the budgeted amounts for each category, try to make it easy if it's possible. For example, if your grocery bill is $400, that way you can remember that each week you can only spend $100 on groceries. And when you go to the store, you don't have to even remember, if you go say once a week, how much you already spent, because you know your budget is $100 per month. That's going to make it significantly easier for you to stick to the budget. Many of us use one checking account for everything. I would suggest separating your accounts and allocating them for specific purposes. So for example, for your pay yourself items, you might want to set up a separate account for each one, so that way you're very clear on how much money you have for each purpose that you're allocating, and watch all of them grow, and that's a very nice feeling. I would also separate your discretionary spending and your must-pay bills. I would also keep them in a separate accounts, where you could have a bill paying account, so you know all of the items went through and you could quickly see that everything cleared, and then having another account for your other discretionary spending. Many banks allow you to set up different alerts, for example, when your balance gets low, and I would definitely suggest utilizing these functions. The easier the process, the more likely we are to follow it. So automate everything you can. Remember those pay yourself items? Make sure you set them up as automated payments. You don't want to remember to manually go in and make that transfer, because we're likely to forget and then it will not happen. So as they say, out of sight, out of mind. Same thing here. Just let it happen automatically, and do the same thing with bills. That way you don't have to worry about forgetting something or getting a late fee for not paying on time. At the end of the month, you want to calculate the actual spend and then compare against your budgeted amounts. Tracking is vital in order for you to make this budget work. So what you want to do is calculate every month and then compare against the budgeted to see, are you staying within the budget? If you're doing even better than the budget, that's awesome. But if you're overspending, analyze to see why that happens. Did you set up your expectations just unrealistically, or is it the behavior, spending behavior that you might need to address? Now, it typically takes a couple months to set up a budget and get it in sync to make sure it actually works when you first do it. So don't be discouraged if it doesn't work for the first couple of months, but keep monitoring and keep analyzing to see what the root cause of why you're over budget, if you are indeed over. Once you set up the budget, the most important thing you need to do is make sure you monitor and track your performance. So we already talked about the month-end process when you would compare your actual spending towards the budgeted. What I would also recommend that you keep taking a look every week or so to see how you're doing. In case you're getting off the track and you're starting to spend significantly more, you can adjust much faster rather than waiting until the end of the month. I hope these tips will help you in your budgeting journey. Leave me a comment below and let me know if you started your budget and how it's going so far. That's it for today's video. Please support me by subscribing, giving me a thumbs up, ringing that notification bell so you know when next video is posted, and also leaving me a comment. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. In the meanwhile, keep your life uncomplicated.